Greetings. We're about to begin this week's edition of Fromm and Fuller with Dave Whelan. But before we start, I want to let you know that next week, on Wednesday, October 16th, we're actually going to be conducting our conversation in front of a live audience at the Avalon Theater. You can get a ticket to attend and reserve a seat by going to the Avalon Foundation and going to their event page, or you can click on the link that's included this week in our column. I hope you'll join us either live on October 16th at 6 p.m. or watch the show the next day on Thursday. Thanks for watching.
It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, I'd like to start with you this week. The country will now experience two 100-year tornadoes and hurricane in Florida and North Carolina. How does it all strike you in terms of how the Republicans and Democrats are using these issues like FEMA support, et cetera, as the election comes down to the last couple of weeks?
Whenever you have a natural disaster, whether it's a major hurricane, a flood, an earthquake, elected officials, president in power, administration always like to visit to show empathy and solidarity with the victims, to show their concern. I'm not sure that really makes a big difference, but it is an expression of concern that I think is important for a national leader to show. Because they're going to be inevitable complaints. You can never satisfy victims. I mean, I know personally when we were flooded in Hurricane Isabel, I was very disappointed with my national flood insurance. I probably didn't read the policy carefully enough, but I got $1,200 from the flood insurance for about $40,000 of damage. So I'm sure there are plenty of cases like that. But this year, there's, nothing has really changed the election. It's been pretty stable, and I'm sure this won't. But there is an important thing that's happening now, and that is the disinformation campaign by the Trump campaign on this. We have just seen a deluge of disinformation coming from the mouths of Trump and Vance and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all the other nutcase acolytes that he inspires, conspiracy theorists. And they're getting a lot of help this time from Elon Musk on X. Marjorie Taylor Greene tells us that they caused the weather. She doesn't define they, but it's probably, I'm not sure whether she means the Democrats or it's the Jews who quit sending the lasers. Lies about the administration and the aid and where it's going, and that it's not going to Republican areas, which every Republican governor has disputed. I mean, his strategy is quite simple. He wants to get, he's running a racist, a hateful, a divisive campaign with the idea of getting all those people who want to resist the change in the country to come out and vote for him. But for Trump, it's the victims of the hurricane be damned. It's all about him. It's all about him regaining power. And we're going to hear plenty more over misinformation on other subjects, including the groundwork he's laying to try to claim that that the election is rigged if he loses. I had a lunch yesterday with the dean of a graduate school at one of the top universities in the area. And his specialty is, I think, education. But he said, I think in my next life I want to be a geologist, because every time I think Trump hits rock bottom, he seems somehow to be able to dig deeper. And that's sort of the way I feel when I hear Trump talk about the storm.
Craig, Florida and North Carolina are important states in this upcoming election. What's your take on how both camps are working it out?
You'd have to ask after Al's discussion there, why would anybody take on a president and an administration on hurricane relief or disaster relief? And I'll leave the analysis of Trump's mindset to Al. I generally subscribe to it, but the fact is that if you're a mayor, you want to make sure the garbage is getting picked up. And if you're a president, you want to make sure disaster relief and FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, is on the scene doing what they're supposed to do. Because this is something that affects, hundreds of thousands, millions of lives when these storms hit in key states like Florida or North Carolina. Louisiana has been hit in the past. And, I went back, I was thinking about this the other day. I went back, and storms and disasters have not been kind to the President's Bush. It was George Herbert Walker Bush who saw headlines back in 1992 like, Bush defends the U.S. response after hurricane. That was in August of 92, an election year, and in a tough race, and Al will remember this, and the response had not been as rapid as it should have been. That was in the Los Angeles Times, in a Florida paper, or no, New York Times. Their headline was Hurricane Andrew, Bush sending army to Florida amid criticism of the relief effort. So it was a relief effort in a key state, but you were getting headline stories on the front page of newspapers from New York to Los Angeles. And it goes to the ability of the president and his administration to respond to these crises. And I will say that, we learned a lot, although George W. Bush, he had Hurricane Katrina, where he was criticized for failing to respond. And he praised the work of his FEMA administrator, who was literally and figuratively in over his head, I think, because the response wasn't as rapid as it people thought it should be. The classic problem here is that there's a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy, but you can't explain away these delays. And FEMA's gotten a lot better, I think. And I think in this case, the response has been a lot better because now FEMA pre-positions things, even without all the paperwork being done, knowing that they're going to get called in. So when the paperwork is signed, they're only a few miles away as opposed to moving halfway across the country. So things have changed the way it's been handled, but it is why you saw on live TV President Biden getting briefed with Vice President Kamala Harris in the briefing on the screen, all the key people there. And so I think the Biden administration is demonstrating this is a hands-on thing. President Biden canceled a foreign trip. They're doing everything they possibly can do, and the last thing Vice President Harris wants is one of these governors in any of these states, frankly, complaining that there's been a poor federal response to the emergency. And again, first and foremost, we should be concerned, and our hearts go out to those people who have seen their homes, washed away and flooded and all that. But politically, this can have an impact, and it gave George Herbert Walker Bush, a problem in August of 92 when the election was just a few months off. This is, just on the eve of the election, and for that reason, it needs to go well. I personally think it's reprehensible for politics to be injected into this. You can, if something isn't being handled properly, fine, criticize it, but the false messages have been horrendous coming from the Trump people and President Trump himself. I will say it has energized Kamala Harris more than almost anything else I've seen to go after him and criticize him. She's so offended by it, and you see a little bit more of her coming out. So I don't think in the end it'll have an effect on how people turn out to vote, because I think generally Washington and the federal government is handling this well. And again, we go back to those all-important undecided voters. What could have changed some of their minds is if it looked like there was an incompetent response of some kind. I will say that going to the scene of these events is always a bit problematic. It interferes with the rescue mission, and I'll take 30 seconds to tell you that back in the Reagan era, there'd been a horrible flood in Monroe, Louisiana, and Mike Deaver thought it'd be great if President Reagan stopped as we flew back from California to Washington, and the advance people got hot waiters for us all. You know, the flood was terrible. Well, by the time we got there, the water had receded, and we looked pretty silly walking around in waders on hard pavement. And the press gave us a hard time for it. But at least the community was grateful that President Reagan had shown up.
Hey, Al, switching gears, the New York Times came out with their Siena poll today that basically said that the Republicans are going to take over the United States Senate, pointing out the campaigns in Texas and Montana and Florida. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a feeling that all those states were in play. What's your take on that kind of news?
Look, the Senate's always been tough for the Democrats. We have a 51 seat. We have 51 seats now, if you include the independents and who caucus with us. Everybody knows that West Virginia's gone, and so that'd make it 50-50. So that depends. If it's 50-50, it depends on who the vice president is, who wins the White House. For the majority, the Montana seat looks like it's in deep trouble. John Tester's been a very tough candidate, very good candidate, strong candidate, but Montana is not exactly a deep blue state, and Trump's likely to win it big, and just for the same reason Larry Hogan is running behind here, Tester has got it's the other side, it's the mirror image, because Trump's going to run very well. The other state, incidentally, that I worry about is Ohio. I mean, Sherrod Brown's been a good senator. He's very popular. He seems to be running ahead in the polls, but Ohio is an increasingly red state, and so we thought that Tim Ryan would run a much better race against J.D. Vance than he wound up doing. In terms of Texas and Florida, anything's possible. Ted Cruz is not very popular, and I think Rick Scott is not a particularly good candidate. But those states are basically Republican states, so it's always an uphill climb for the Democrats. And, people always get excited about it because we're going to have a chance to beat Ted Cruz. But in the end, those things generally have I hope it's different this time, but those things generally have a way of sort of coming back to an equilibrium. And, Cruz won by 2 or 3 points last time. He'll probably do the same this time. And, Florida, I think, will be uphill. It's even if you look at registration in Florida, it's moved very strongly toward the Republicans in the last 4 years. And so it's just going to be a hard year. So I think the Senate's in trouble. The House is a different story. The House, I think, will reflect the presidential race a lot more. And, with Mike Lawler getting in a little trouble in New York now for doing his blackface imitation with Michael Jackson or whatever. It's in a very tight swing district. It's possible that if Harris wins the White House, that Democrats will win the House, because that will be much more reflective. But I think the Senate's going to be very hard.
Craig, you have the last word this week.
Well, you ask about one poll, and I really think that this race, one, it remains close, and two, the polling is going to be pretty volatile right to the end, I think. I certainly could be proven wrong, but my sense is that there's very little out there that moves more people to Trump. And as Al was saying, I mean, even this latest thing with the spreading false information about hurricanes, now you've got the Woodward book. Undoubtedly, there's more to come out of some of that. And it's giving pause to Republicans and undecideds who might like some of the things that they think Trump would do or what they remember Trump having done, but they're having a more and more difficult time voting for him. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the all-important question is, will Trump's behavior tend to diminish his possible supporters from coming out to vote at all? And I think it does. And I think that Kamala Harris, who is ever more present, now doing interviews that the media was telling everybody that she should do, she handles herself fine in those interviews. She's got more of them coming. There's a lot, it's a campaign with just more momentum behind it. That's going to drive more voters to the polls. And I agree completely with Al. I think that will tend to make the election for Democrats to the House less of a lift than it does in the Senate. But I frankly wouldn't be surprised to see Democrats hold the Senate. I think I can't see a reason why Kamala Harris won't have a better night on November 5th than she has right now. And I still think the race is close, but I think if she gets the turnout that she's stimulating by the nature of her campaign, and Trump continues on this crazy downward spiral he's on, that we could see something quite different than what a pollster gets in a phone call, simply asking, are you for or lean towards Harris or Trump? Yeah. It's very easy and sit in your house and say, I'm leaning one way. The question is, are you going to go out and vote that way?
There was Craig, there was a really interesting story on a really interesting poll in Bulwark yesterday of Haley voters, which showed that, about a quarter of the Haley voters who voted for Trump last time are likely to vote for Harris. So that could be another, who knows. And the only other point that was really interesting this week, Nate Cohn in his column, The Tilt, the New York Times, did a piece on the polling, because this polling, particularly in the swing states, is all over the lot. And he talked about how they're weighted. And part of the New York Times Siena poll, which has been the top-rated poll for the last 2 or 3 cycles, doesn't weight by the previous result. And most of these polls, the pollsters who are very aware of how far off they were last time in the presidential, are trying to weight it by putting what they get up against the 2020 result. And that increases Trump's position in the poll, because Trump ran about 3 or 4 points ahead of the polling in 2020. I don't know whether that's true. I mean, it's far beyond my pay grade to understand, but it's an interesting thing.
Yeah. We have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.